Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Reforged podcast. My name is Drew and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Today's episode is a special one. It's the first of what I'm calling the Saturday special. Two reasons for that. One is obviously this is a little bit different than my normal upload schedule. I apologize for that. It's been a bit of a busy week, busier than I expected. I had a couple volunteer opportunities I got to participate in, which are really cool. And some big assignments I've been working on, as well as just some time with friends and in fellowship. So I just didn't have a chance to get this out sooner. Apologize for that. So I'm rolling it out today. Still want to make sure I have an episode this week. And I thought it'd also kind of work out because today's episode is going to be a little bit different in terms of content. We're not taking a super deep dive into scripture. Or necessarily looking at some spiritual concepts per se. Instead, I want to take this time to talk more about what's been going on in the world recently and take a look at our culture. I think it's important to come at that with a lens of Christianity as well, to consider through Christian context what's been going on in our world and to talk about that. Really appreciate you guys checking out this episode. I hope you enjoy it. This, of course, isn't just going to become the norm or a replacement for the normal show. Again, this is an additional thing, something we'll do every once in a while as I see it be necessary. But I'm glad that you've given it a chance and hope you find it impactful still today. So what I really want to talk about is particularly in the context of the U.S. I am a United States citizen. I live in this great country. I'm proud to call it home. I love it dearly. I will always be a Christian first. Being a Christian is the most important thing about me, but I am very proud to be an American as well. So I would like to talk about just a little bit, especially with the recent election, the direction that the country's heading in, and talk about what that looks like and try to bring the light of the Lord to that situation as well. So, first, I do want to take a moment to just contextualize with scripture, though, a little bit about what I'm talking about today. So, to summarize, I want to talk about the election of President Trump and the direction I think he's going to take the country in. Personally, I think that God is going to actually work a lot of good through his administration. I want to talk a little bit about why that is. So, to start, I want to talk about in scripture examples of times that God has brought up figures in the Bible, and he's been able to use those to work out his great plan. In no way am I saying that Trump is a biblical figure. In no way am I saying that God is directly associating himself with Trump. I don't think that it's proper or accurate to say that any character in our modern times can be attributed to being one with God. I don't think that it's a fair comparison to take people that are from the Bible or God's word, the story that he's already told to us, and try to make comparisons to the modern day to say that they're equal comparisons. But what I do think is that the lessons we can learn from the Bible, so the idea that God has used people to fulfill his will, I do think those still do apply today. Because as Christians, we believe that too. We believe that God can use us to perform his will here on earth, that he can use us to perpetuate his love and goodness. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about. So before I do that, I'll, of course, give some biblical examples of how God has done that before in very, very clear, evident ways, and then kind of get into how I think he can do that through Trump. And before I even start that, I do want to talk about too just this idea. I know that politics is a very difficult subject, and a lot of people have their own opinions and emotions tied up in all of this. I know that there's a lot of joy and there's a lot of sadness and fear that come with these kinds of discussions. And so I just want to say that whether you're happy with the election of President Trump or very disappointed in it, just I want to give you some hope and faith today that we serve a God who is above these worldly leaders and above these worldly things, and that the leaders of our nation are important to our lives, but they are not more important than God. And our number one priority should be pursuing Christ and pursuing Christianity. And also, we need to have faith because he says and he promises Christ is the ruler of all nations, and good things will be done through him no matter what. And so we can have a confidence that even when we're happy and we're satisfied, and even when we're not happy and satisfied with our world leaders, that we can we can have confidence that God's plan is so good for us and he's so powerful and has so much authority that there's nothing that we can do as humans to stop him. Um, and that doesn't mean that God isn't involved or doesn't care about our current situations. Again, I think he does. But that is to say that even when things seem bleak, we serve a God who has the final say and has the final victory. So just a word of encouragement there. Just whether you're happy or sad, always remember that the leader of all nations is God and is Christ, and we have an allegiance and faith to him above all else, and he will be faithful with that. Um, you know, mentioning that though, I do want to then get into how how God has used biblical leaders. I think a great example is Noah. Noah was told to build an ark, huge boat, and he was told that the human race was going to be wiped out by this great chaotic flood, and that Noah was being chosen to continue the human race, to perpetuate humanity, so that God would continue to love them, even though his world and his creation, his people had become corrupt, and he wanted to wipe them clean. That the faithfulness of Noah showed him that um, there was still beauty and good left in the earth, and he took that and perpetuated humanity through it. And so the thing that I think is important about that story, there are kind of three things. One is God. God is obviously the most important thing about that story. The important thing to know is that the goodness that is done through Noah is not done by Noah. Noah builds the ark, and Noah's family and two of every animal go on the ark, and then they go through the flood, and then when they come to land, humanity and creation is saved and continues onward and rebuilds from that point, right? Um, Noah doesn't do that. Noah is faithful in building the boat and getting on the boat and navigating through the flood, but that's because God told him to do it. And it's God that's doing the great work of actually sheltering and providing for Noah and his family through this great flood, warning them ahead of time to prepare them, and then giving them a world that regrows after the flood. And so all that is to say is that when God works through people, we have to recognize that it's good that people are faithful and allow themselves to be used by God for great things, but it's still the great thing that is being done by God, and all the glory is attributed to him, not to the person that acts on his behalf. Um, Another thing I want to note is, though, it is still important that Noah was faithful, because around him, society was telling him he was crazy, and he was surrounded by immorality, and he chose, regardless of what the world around him was doing, he chose to follow God and follow God's command and instruction and say, you know, God is telling me to do this thing, and I believe him, I trust him, and I have faith in him, and so I'm going to do it. So having great faith is really important, and just being obedient to what is right rather than what is comfortable. Final thing, though, I think is important to note, is that Noah was not a perfect person, and I think this is especially important to note because, as we'll get into, none of our worldly leaders are perfect. Even when they're good worldly leaders, they're still not perfect. Um, and so immediately after the flood, Noah builds this vineyard. He gets drunken and he becomes ashamed by his sons, and so Noah was by no means a perfect man. He had his sins, he had his faults and his imperfections, and that God. The point I want to make though is going back to God, that God uses those people anyway. God uses these faulty, broken people because we're all faulty, broken people. Everyone in the Bible and everyone who lives now um, is a faulty, broken person, and God chooses to use us anyway. And that's a beautiful, powerful thing. And so I think that's really going to be relevant when we talk about what I think about the upcoming presidency of Trump. Um, and there are other examples of this in the Bible. Kings like King David, faithful. God blessed the nation of Israel through him a lot, gave him a lot of victory. He was faithful. People were faithful to God under him because he was faithful. But then ultimately, he still has his flaws and shortcomings. His adultery with Bathsheba, where he disgraces her husband Uriah, sends him out to battle, gets him killed, tries to cover his shame, deals with the consequences, wrestles with God. A lot of tragedy and struggle there. But God uses them anyway, and so that's my point with that. Um, so I think we can learn those three things: is that God is the one who ultimately works good, no matter who He works it through. The people that work goodness through God need to be faithful to Him, or at least to what they feel is right, what they feel called to do. Because God actually uses a lot of what I would argue are not very religious people in the Bible. Um, great example would be, you know, Samson is a far from moral judge of Israel, and doesn't really seem to be very religious, but he uses his strength, and I should say God uses his strength for a good cause. Samson just kind of uses his own strength. um, and of course, there's other great examples too. Perhaps an even better example is Rahab, who is actually a prostitute, but she was living in the land of Canaan, and when the spies of Israel came in to survey the land, she actually hid them, right, and took care of them, and then came to faith. So again, not a very religious or you would say even by those standards of the day moral person, but regardless of that, God was able to use her to actually protect these Israelite spies, and then also um, brought her into the covenant and when they dominated land. So I guess my point with all that is, as I mentioned, those three things. God uses God works good. He'll do it through people, but God is the one who works the good. God does it through people who are faithful or faithful to what is right, and God also um, uses people that are broken to make mistakes. And I think all of that is entirely relevant when we look at Trump. Because the case with Donald Trump is, I guess I can't say with all certainty. I don't know what his faith background is, but I don't believe that he is religious in any way necessarily. He's given signs that he at least has a sense of recognition that God exists, and has a reverence for that. But I'm not sure in the way that there's a relationship. So I don't know. I can't say with confidence that Donald Trump is a Christian, I guess is what I mean to say. And so to think that he is motivated directly by Christ, and does things that he believes that um, God wants him to do, and that he aligns himself intentionally with God, I think it is a reach to say that that is the case. I also think that's important to note that there are many things that Trump has done, or at the very least been accused of doing, that are not very Christian, not very moral, that I certainly don't agree with. He's got a lot of incidents, especially with women, with having so many wives, and incidents with adultery and such, between the ones that are confirmed and the ones that aren't. I certainly don't advocate for that. I certainly don't defend that. I don't think that that's a good thing. And as is any politician, I'm certain there are things that I would disagree with him on, or how he does things. One would be, well, I don't want to get too much into political issues. I just want to more talk about, I think, where God's taking the nation. But I'm sure they'll come up in a second here. But I guess my point is to say is that I'm by no means going to say that Trump is a perfect person. I will be forefront and honest. I did vote for him, and I do think that he was the better candidate. And I am happy that he won. Um, and I know that that's not the opinion of everyone. So for those who differ in their beliefs than me, that are sticking around to watch this, I really appreciate it. And I hope you'll hear what I have to say honestly. Um, but I respect your right to disagree. And whatever your issues with him might be, um, they're probably understandable to me. But ultimately, I think that he's going to be the best candidate. And I first want to start off by talking about the fact that he was almost assassinated. And I don't say this lightly, but I do think that God was protecting Donald Trump. And I don't say this to say that Trump is some, again, perfect religious figure. I don't know what even his background in Christianity is. So I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that I think it's very hard to argue that God was not with Donald Trump during this campaign because um, I don't even say that to the point that necessarily that God. I'm not saying this like God is backing Trump. I'm not necessarily even saying like God wants Donald Trump to be our president or anything, but I'm just saying God protected Trump because he was up on that stage at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, and he could have been killed on national television. This race could have been over that day, and he could have been, yeah, on national television assassinated. And just because he moved slightly uh, to look a different direction is how the bullet missed his head and hit just his ear instead, and that's the only reason he's alive. I can't call that coincidence as a Christian. I call that God's protection because again, the timing and the positioning. There's just no way. There's no way that would coincidentally happen, and I just have to believe that God was protecting Donald Trump that day. And I think that even though he doesn't have a religious background necessarily, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I'm not speaking absolutes here, but I do think that Trump recognizes that. He's spoken to it, recognizing that it's God that protected him in that case. I think that really changed his platform, his presidency, and his messaging because he's been running such a great unifying campaign. I know there's still not people happy with it, but he has been a lot more moderate and middle of the road. And ever since that moment, especially, he's wanted to invite all Americans into a better future for the country. Again, some of you may disagree with his vision for this country, but um, I do think that he wants to be better for the people and bring us back to a sense of normalcy and greatness that this nation can have. And so I think God was protecting him with that. And I think it's important to recognize that. At the very least, God didn't want him out of this race and out of this world. God still had a plan for him. And if that plan is going to be that through this administration, a lot of great things are done for for Christianity, that more people can come to faith and the churches will be made stronger and our community will be made stronger and our unity will be made stronger, our peace and our love will be made stronger. I think that's a great thing. And so, like I said, I'm a Christian first, and so I don't confine God to a political party. But what I do is I say, which political party do I think is going to best reflect the values I have as a Christian, the values of God. Um, and in this case, I think the conservative movement and the administration under Trump is going to do great things for that, and I really hope for that. And I want to talk about some of those things. First is just there's been pretty much a unchecked power on the other side of the aisle. And I'm not here to demonize anyone that is liberal or has other beliefs than me, but um, I just want to point out what I feel is a deep evil in some of the things that side of the aisle pushes and promotes. I think abortion is a terribly evil thing. And in an ideal world, I think it should be federally banned. And my reason for that would be that I believe that's unborn human life, and I believe that you shouldn't be able, for any reason, to just simply terminate a pregnancy, as they call it, but end that life. I don't believe that you should have any uh, ability to do that. And I know that again, there's a lot of people who disagree, a lot of emotion tied up with that. I understand that and I respect that, but I want to say where my priority lies. God tells us the sanctity of human life, the sanctity of marriage and of replenishing the species and multiplying, and because of the sanctity of not murdering one another. And I view abortion as just murder in a different way. Like it's just a form of murder that not everyone recognizes as such, but I believe that's what it is. And there are tons of times in history where things that are immoral aren't seen immoral at the time, slavery. Um, and I think abortion isn't any different than that. And some people get really offended and upset when I say that. But I think in a couple years' time, with any luck, um, it'll be reversed where people will say, yeah, abortion is like slavery. I mean, there's more abortions every year than, like, at this point, it's caused more death than things like the Holocaust, which we all recognize as tragedies, and I think it's an awful thing. And so ideally, I would have it federally banned, because I think that we need to federally protect the sanctity of human life. Our rights, because we're born, are protected. If someone kills us, that's wrong. That's not legal to do. And so I'd love it to be seen the same way for our unborn brothers and sisters, but um, and I obviously recognize that Trump doesn't hold that same belief as me, and whether that is genuinely what he believes in or if it's a play for moderacy to get more votes, I don't care. Whatever the reason is, um, I still would rather see it the way that I think would be more aligned with God. But I also recognize we live in a nation where we have to make concessions and we have to sometimes play a slow game or a game of compromise at times. And so I do respect, and understand his reasoning for leaving it as a state's issue now, and that's 100% better than having it federally enforced. So um, looking at the party that wants abortion to be legal everywhere, and kind of like a staple of American culture, versus looking at the party that's saying it's not, it's something that can be determined by states if it's necessary or allowed, and we'll make concessions on it if need be, but like it's certainly not something to be proud of or a standard to promote, and not something that we really want to platform on. That appeals to me a lot more as a Christian. So that's kind of what I believe in. Or another big one is like the issue of transgenderism. And I've just over the past couple of years seeing how that's just massively taken over and become such a big thing. And I personally don't believe in it. And I think that I sympathize with the people that struggle with their gender identity and think they don't identify with the sex that they actually are, and that there's that dissonance between the reality of their body and how they feel. And I sympathize with that. I think it's an awful thing. I've never experienced that, and I can't imagine what that'd be like. It's not something I take lightly. But that being said, I don't think the solution is to then affirm that struggle and delusion, but rather to address it and fight for truth and reality in it. And so, seeing everything go the other way with that, has been shocking to me and difficult and not right, in my opinion. And you know, I think it's wrong in general, but the main thing is too just seeing that promoted towards children has been really appalling to me, to be completely honest. And it's been a perversion, in my opinion. I have a younger brother who's been going through middle school and such, and so for me, seeing all this stuff being promoted in elementary and middle schools, I think it's bad enough in high schools, but especially there, uh, it's been absurd to me, and yeah, just it's just been appalling. Like I just think of my brother and how much of this garbage he has to sit through, and how this is being put as a genuine proposition. Like, we're not just addressing it. Like, some people feel this way, and then we're trying to help those people, but we're just proposing this idea to anyone. Like, hey, this is true, that like you could just be the opposite sex or whatever. And I just think that's an awful thing to do, especially to impressionable kids. And I can see through his peer group like how awful and terrible that is, and how many kids are just lost and super far from any sense of reality, but like especially too with that, really far from God too, because it's really hard to propose Christianity, in an honest way to them, um, when it's so contrary to what they've just picked up in school. And so that's something also that I'm really happy that seems to be losing out. It's something that I'm seeing be talked about less and less because I think that with Trump's win, I think it's just starting to go away a little bit. At least the constant talking about it. I think there's still more work to be done. And again, I don't want to just isolate the people that struggle with that. I still again sympathize with them, and I want them to be helped. But I think our nation, we can't. I think we need to recognize people that struggle with things like that, but we can't accept that as just a reality. Like I think that we need to be I think we need to accept that people like that exist, but we don't need to change our standards around it. And I think we need to preach again truth, compassion, and love to them. And I think a lot of people just want to preach compassion and they miss truth. I also think there's a lot of people that want to preach truth and they miss compassion as well. It goes both ways. But to actually teach love, which is what God asks us to do, we have to do both of those things. Um, and I think the way that that's done usually is not a top down way, and that's a lot of what government's been trying to do is a lot top down stuff, but it's really bottom up. It's from smaller communities, and so I mean I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see how the changes that come with Trump's administration um, may take some reliance and therefore I guess influence away from our government and direct it back to communities where people are able to genuinely connect with one another and go through life together and help one another. Um, so that's a big thing. So I'd say like for big things like that, like morally, it's just going to be better for our country, and I think we're going towards things like that. And so again, well, I don't think that Trump is coming from a Christian background. I do think that what he's going to build his administration on, what he's fighting for, is going to be better for Christians and more aligned with Christianity. It's never going to be perfect, but it's going to be at least better. Like, there's going to be less abortion, which means more of God's people get to live and experience life. There's going to be less of this toxic gender ideology, which means, less kids will be confused and of taken out of this idea and understanding of who they are and who God made them to be, and perverted and twisted and confused into who am I really and what am I, and will stop putting so much stock into who they feel they are and trying to change their physical characteristics to align with that, and more focus on the fact that God made them beautifully and their identity can be rooted in Him. I think that's a beautiful thing too. And yeah, I just think I recently heard a speech that I think put it well, and it's that our American society was founded on it, thrived under the ideas of liberty, strength, and virtue. That the freedoms we have in America are fundamental to being a prosperous nation, um, especially economically. Having the freedom to innovate, to run business, to compete, and the sharing of knowledge is a great thing. And when it comes to strength, like having a strong military presence is actually, I think, a great thing too, for our nation and other nations, because when America is strong, the rest of the world is seems in check. Immediately after we see President win this election, we see the conflicts in the Middle East. You got terrorist organization Hamas is saying they'd like to actually negotiate an end to the war now, which they certainly weren't saying before. Or you know, you have Zelensky and Putin talking about peace talks as well and ending the war. And I think that's just because they know the strength that America has, and they know that with Trump in office, like that strength is a valid threat. And um, it's difficult to say like threat is a good thing, but the truth is that in many cases among humanity, it is that the threat of force keeps things in check and balanced and can resolve conflict. Um, and so I think that's a great thing. And the final thing would be just virtue, like understanding the importance of morality and being there for one another. And of course, we all have different ideas of what exactly morality is. And I try to get my standard of morality from the Bible. And we all have our disagreements as Christians, I'm sure, of what I derive from the Bible and think is moral, and what others might. But I never let my own ideas influence how I read the Bible, but vice versa. I try to let what I read from the Bible influence my ideas. And so, you know, and I just think some great things, even if they aren't coming from Christianity, which was said as much in the speech I heard. Like the I think it's important to recognize that even though we're not a Christian nation, like we are built off of Christianity. We're a nation that was built by Christian leaders, um, that was founded on Judeo and Christian values, and all of the people went to church. The question of religion wasn't, are you religious? It was just kind of more like, what denomination are you? And I'm glad that we have the freedom in this country to choose to be religious, that we're protected to be Christian, and I'm also glad that we have the protection to not be Christian too, because I think that's important because we're not forced into Christianity, and so I don't think that our nation should force us into Christianity either. I think that's kind of contrary. The entire idea of Christianity is that God and Christ have done so much for us that all we need to do is accept a free gift and pursue a relationship with them to receive that, um, and and that the choice is ours. Um, that out of God's love, He wants relationship with us but doesn't force us. I think that's what we need, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing with our nation. I think we shouldn't be forced into it. So I'm grateful that's that way. But my point is that even though our nation isn't Christian, we were a nation of Christians. And even when we're not a nation of Christians, we're a nation of people always that have values, whether those values um, seem moral to most or if they seem misguided, whether they reflect the Bible or whether they don't. And I think that with Trump's administration, we're going to see a return to where the spirit of America, a majority of people, are pursuing good things, pride in their country, hard work, love for one another. I think we're going to see a big resurgence in people going to church, which I'm very hopeful for. And I hope and pray that it'll be genuine conversions and not just attending church for the sake of it. But I also don't think that I also think that it's just inherently a good thing, even for people to be attending church and have this community. I'd love to see it be, again, a genuine faith and relationship with God, but at the very least, relations with one another. And just a spirit of being a nation returning to morality is going to be, I think, a good thing. And I think, again, this kind of goes back to God. And my whole idea with this is that I think God has really good things in store for the world and for our nation. I think He's using our nation to bless other nations, that our prosperity will be prosperous to others, our security will be more secure for others. Um, and I'm really hopeful and expectant to see what God does during these next 4 years, um, and what good He can do. And I think that He's going to do it through President Trump. And so I'm personally happy that he won because I think that if he hadn't won, I don't think that I don't I still think that God his ultimate plan will be worked out and that he's good and I think that he can work through that. But I simply think that in this moment, um, less good would be done by him. And so I don't know if it's important or not that Trump is in office right now to his ultimate plan for us, but I am extremely grateful that he is because I think it means good things for us and for the American people and for the rest of the world in this time. And so um, Trump is not by far, is far from a perfect person, just as we all are. And I think that despite that, God is going to work great things through him and his administration, the people he works with, um, and through this country. So I'm really expectant and hopeful and excited to see what this will look like. I think it's gonna be good. And for those of you who feel opposite from me, I hope that this maybe has at least given you a chance to hear a perspective that you know maybe maybe either you're not satisfied, and so at the very least you have confidence that God is working through this time, or if if you're not happy with this time, at least consider that God's ultimate will still will be done regardless. Or maybe you've been able to consider, like, you know what, you're right. I don't like Trump, but maybe some good things for Christianity would come from this. Um, I think, like, honestly, we need to focus less on Trump as a person and more on the reality of what his administration is going to do. Because I know a lot of people that hold Christian conservative values, and they're just not happy that Trump is in office, because they don't like him. And I think that's fair, but I also think that would it really be better to have someone who doesn't promote those values that you have, that you believe are Christian? Do you think it's better to have someone that you find less objectionable, but that ultimately less good will be done through? I personally have never felt that way. And I'm also not even saying that Trump's opponent was not objectionable either. I have objections to her as well, but I don't need to talk about those. My point is that God is going to do great things through any leader, but I think especially we can look forward to good things coming from Trump. And for those of you who don't agree with that or see that, that's completely fair. You're entitled to that. And you have your own conversation with God about that, and and with others, what that's going to look like. And I think it's important to keep talking about it. But I also think just what I want us to all take away, whether we're happy or we're sad, um, God is in control of all things, even when it doesn't feel like it. Because I felt like for the past 4 years, our country was not moving in a good direction, but I still had faith in God, and it didn't affect me on a daily basis. I mean, it did. It bothered me, and there were certainly negative impacts, especially economically, on my life. So it's not to say that it didn't matter at all, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there's never a day that I felt like the world was ending or that my life was in bad hands, because I can have this faith and confidence in Christ. And I hope that if you're on the other side of the aisle of me, that you can have that faith, now when you're the one that's, I guess, not happy, because it all works out. It all works out in the end. And I have faith that we're all going to align closer to God, not always even by our own actions, but simply because He keeps pulling us closer to Him. And I know that the day will come where all of us who truly believe will be in presence with Him, and none of this will matter anymore. So, yeah. Thank you guys for listening. I know it was a little bit different, and could stir up some disagreement, but thank you for listening anyways. And I hope that as you go through this time, you can be excited if you're excited, but don't gloat, and you can still be kind and personable, especially to those who disagree. If you're disappointed, that you can still also be civil about it, and be kind to those who are happy right now. And I don't want us to be judging anyone, as a person because of what they believe. I want us to be able to have discussions about what we stand for and believe in. But I think we're entering an age. I'm hopeful we're entering an age where um, we can be more unified, and I think it's going to be great. So, really looking forward to that. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please, share it around with friends and family. Um, you guys are an important part of this ministry too. Without you, this show doesn't grow, the show doesn't spread. So please share, whether it be this episode or prior episodes. just be sharing the show. We have it on podcasts on Spotify and we have it on YouTube. Just be sharing that around to your friends, your family, coworkers, anyone that you think would benefit from hearing it. Um, and I'm just really hopeful, that this continues to grow and continues to be a ministry for God. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to being back next time to talk about get back into the Word. But I appreciate you giving me the chance to do this little Saturday special here. And yeah, hope you all have a great rest of your weekend and a great upcoming week. Thanksgiving's just around the corner. I know I'm super excited. Hope you guys are too. So, with that being said, God bless you. And remember, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another.